The blue glow of Lucas's monitor cast dancing shadows across his cramped apartment bedroom. Empty energy drink cans formed a small aluminum city on his desk, and the faint smell of instant ramen hung in the air like incense to the gaming gods. At 22, Lucas had perfected the art of the all-nighter, especially when Nexus Warfare was involved. "Dude, Shadow Vixen is online again," his friend Jake's voice crackled through the headset. "We should invite her to the raid. She absolutely demolished that last boss fight." Lucas glanced at his friends list, seeing the familiar username that had become legendary in their gaming circle. Shadow Vixen, a player so skilled she seemed to bend the game's physics to her will. Her character moved with a fluid grace that suggested thousands of hours of practice, and her strategic mind could turn any losing battle into a victory. "Yeah, send the invite," Lucas replied, adjusting his headset. He'd been curious about this mysterious player for months. Shadow Vixen never used voice chat, communicating only through quick, efficient text messages that somehow conveyed more personality than most people managed in conversation. The familiar ping of an accepted party invitation made Lucas's pulse quicken slightly. He'd never admit it to Jake, but there was something intriguing about Shadow Vixen that went beyond her gaming skills. Maybe it was the way she'd occasionally drop subtle jokes into the chat, or how she seemed to genuinely care when other players were struggling. "Shadow Vixen, ready to make some magic happen, boys?" Lucas found himself smiling at the screen. Her messages always had this confident, slightly playful tone that made him picture someone who didn't take themselves too seriously despite their obvious expertise. "All right, Shadow," Lucas typed back, using the nickname their group had adopted. "Let's see what you've got tonight." What she had, apparently, was enough skill to carry their entire team through what should have been an impossible dungeon. Lucas watched in amazement as Shadow Vixen's character, a dark-armored sorceress with flowing black robes, danced between enemy attacks while simultaneously coordinating their team's movements through rapid-fire text commands. "Shadow Vixen, Lucas, flank left when I cast the ice wall. Jake, you're our anchor. Hold that position no matter what." Her tactical awareness was incredible. She seemed to predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead, always positioning herself exactly where she needed to be. During one particularly intense boss fight, Lucas found himself so focused on watching her play that he nearly got his own character killed. "Shadow Vixen, eyes on your own screen, hotshot, winky face." Even through text, he could feel her amusement. It was embarrassing and thrilling at the same time. The raid lasted until nearly 3 in the morning, ending with their team achieving a server record. As the others logged off one by one, Lucas found himself alone in the party chat with Shadow Vixen. "Great playing tonight," he typed, then hesitated before adding, "You're incredible at this game." Shadow Vixen, flatterer. "You're not too bad yourself. That combo you pulled off during the dragon fight was pretty smooth." Lucas felt a warm flush of pride. Getting praise from Shadow Vixen was like earning approval from a gaming legend. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. "Shadow Vixen, longer than I care to admit. What about you? You seem pretty young. College age?" "Just graduated, actually. 22 and trying to figure out what comes next." Lucas found himself being more honest than he'd intended. There was something about the anonymity of online chat that made it easier to open up. "Shadow Vixen, the quarter-life crisis phase. I remember it well. Don't worry, it gets easier. And more complicated. But mostly easier." Sounds like the voice of experience. "Shadow Vixen, something like that. I should probably get some sleep. Unlike some people, I can't survive purely on energy drinks and gaming adrenaline." Lucas laughed out loud at that. She was definitely older than him, but her sense of humor felt ageless. "Same here. Good playing with you, Shadow." "Shadow Vixen, sweet dreams, Lucas. Try to dream about something other than boss fights." Chapter 2, Patterns. Over the next few weeks, gaming with Shadow Vixen became the highlight of Lucas's evenings. She was online almost every night, usually logging in around 10 p.m. and playing until the early morning hours. They developed an easy rhythm. Shadow Vixen would suggest objectives, Lucas would coordinate with Jake and their other regular teammates, and together they'd tackle challenges that individual players couldn't dream of conquering. But it was the quiet moments that Lucas found himself treasuring most. After the others logged off, he and Shadow Vixen would often stay online, just chatting while their characters stood idle in whatever digital landscape they'd conquered that night. Shadow Vixen: so what's the plan after graduation? Career in professional gaming? I wish. Job hunting mostly. My degree is in computer science, so probably something in tech. You? Shadow Vixen: I work in tech actually. Systems architecture. It's about as exciting as it sounds, but it pays the bills and gives me flexible hours for important things like maintaining my gaming addiction. Lucas tried to picture her, a tech professional who was skilled enough to game at a semi-professional level. In his mind, she became a shifting composite of every competent, witty woman he'd ever encountered, but none of the images quite fit with the personality that came through in her messages. "Do you ever miss being 22? He found himself asking one night. Shadow Vixen: some parts of it. The feeling that everything was still possible, that the world was full of doors you hadn't tried opening yet. But I don't miss the anxiety of not knowing who I was or what I wanted. What do you want now? There was a long pause before her reply. Shadow Vixen: good question. I thought I had it figured out, but lately, I don't know. Maybe I want to feel that sense of possibility again. What about you? Honestly, I want to feel like I'm good at something that matters. Gaming is fun, but it's not exactly changing the world. Shadow Vixen: who says it doesn't matter? You've built friendships, developed skills, learned to work as part of a team. Plus, you make people laugh. That's not nothing. Lucas stared at the screen, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. When was the last time someone had talked to him like this, really listening to what he said and responding with genuine thoughtfulness? Thanks, Shadow. That means a lot coming from you. Shadow Vixen: anytime. Hotshot. Chapter 3: Real-World Intrusions. Lucas's apartment building was one of those generic complexes that had sprung up around the university. All beige walls and thin floors that let you hear your neighbors' entire lives whether you wanted to or not. He'd been living there for 2 years and had perfected the art of polite avoidance with his fellow tenants, which made it particularly jarring when he started noticing things. It began with the music. Some nights, when he was taking a break from gaming, he'd hear the faint sound of metal filtering through the walls. Not the aggressive, screaming kind, but something darker and more atmospheric. The kind of music that sounded like it belonged in a Gothic cathedral or a really well-designed video game soundtrack. Then there were the delivery patterns. Lucas, subsisting primarily on takeout and grocery delivery, had become familiar with the rhythm of packages arriving in their building. But he started noticing that his neighbor in 4B seemed to get a lot of late-night deliveries. Gaming gear, from the looks of the boxes he glimpsed in the hallway. High-end stuff, the kind of equipment serious gamers invested in. One evening, as he was heading back from checking his mailbox, Lucas passed his neighbor's door just as a particularly epic guitar solo echoed from within. He paused, recognizing the song from his own playlist. It was the kind of music he imagined Shadow Vixen listening to, dark, complex, and unapologetically intense. The thought was ridiculous, of course. Shadow Vixen could be anywhere in the world. The internet had a way of making geography irrelevant. But still, the coincidence nagged at him. That night, he decided to do a little detective work. Hey Shadow, random question. What kind of music do you listen to while gaming? Shadow Vixen: depends on my mood. Tonight it's some symphonic metal. Gets the blood pumping for boss fights. You? Lucas's heart rate spiked. Same here, actually. Any particular bands? Shadow Vixen: you probably haven't heard of them. I have pretty niche tastes. She named 3 bands. Lucas knew all of them. More importantly, he was pretty sure he'd heard at least one of them playing through the walls earlier that evening. Actually, I love those guys, he typed back, trying to keep his tone casual. Great choice for late-night gaming sessions. Shadow Vixen, a man of culture. I'm impressed. Most people my age think that stuff is just noise. Lucas stared at that message for a long time. Most people her age. She'd mentioned before that she was older than him, but this was the first real hint about how much older. Combined with her tech career, her confident personality, and her music tastes. Shadow, this is going to sound crazy, but what city are you in? There was a long pause. Shadow Vixen, why do you ask? Lucas's hands hovered over the keyboard. He could back down, make up some excuse about curiosity or maybe planning some kind of meet-up. But something made him push forward. I think you might be my neighbor. The pause this time was even longer. Lucas watched his screen, heart hammering, wondering if he'd just made a colossal mistake. Maybe she'd think he was some kind of stalker. Maybe she'd block him. Maybe he'd just ruined the best friendship he'd had in months. Shadow Vixen, what makes you think that? The music. The delivery schedules. The fact that I've been hearing gaming sounds through the walls that match up with your online times. Lucas took a deep breath and added, I live in apartment 4A at Riverside Commons. Another pause. Then, Shadow Vixen, well, shit. Chapter 4. Revelations. Shadow Vixen, 4B. I've been listening to you rage quit at that racing game for 2 months. Lucas buried his face in his hands, mortified. Oh God. I'm so sorry. These walls are like paper, aren't they? Shadow Vixen, it's actually kind of endearing. You have very creative cursing patterns. Despite his embarrassment, Lucas found himself laughing. This is so weird. I've been talking to you almost every night, and you've been like 20 feet away the entire time. Shadow Vixen, it gets weirder. I think I've seen you around the building. You're the tall guy with the messy brown hair who always looks slightly confused in the elevator, right? Lucas's image of Shadow Vixen, which had remained frustratingly vague despite months of conversation, suddenly snapped into focus. There was only one neighbor he'd seen regularly who fit the profile: tech career, goth aesthetic, and the right age range. Black hair, usually wearing band t-shirts, has a motorcycle in the parking garage? Shadow Vixen, that's me. Raven Blackwood, your mysterious neighbor and apparently your gaming partner. Though my friends call me Ray. Lucas tried to process this information. Raven Blackwood, even her real name sounded like something from a fantasy novel. He'd seen her around the building dozens of times, usually late at night or early in the morning, always looking like she'd stepped out of a music video. She was striking in a way that had made him do double takes in the elevator, but he'd never worked up the courage to do more than nod politely. And she was Shadow Vixen. The player he'd developed. What exactly had he developed? A friendship, certainly. But if he was being honest with himself, it had started to feel like something more. So, he typed, trying to keep his tone light, want to grab coffee sometime? I feel like we have some catching up to do. Shadow Vixen, Ray, how about now? I've got a fresh pot brewing, and I'm curious to see if you're as charming in person as you are behind a keyboard. Lucas looked down at himself, wrinkled t-shirt, gaming shorts, hair that hadn't seen a comb in 2 days. I should probably shower first. And maybe find clothes that don't have food stains on them. Ray, you've got 10 minutes. Any longer and I'm drinking all the coffee myself. Chapter 5, Face to Face. Lucas had never been more nervous about walking 20 feet. He'd changed his shirt 3 times, attempted to tame his hair, and brushed his teeth twice. Finally, accepting that he was never going to look like anything other than a slightly panicked college graduate, he knocked on apartment 4B. The door opened, and Lucas found himself face to face with Shadow Vixen. Raven Blackwood was exactly as striking in person as she'd been in his glimpses around the building, but seeing her up close revealed details he'd missed. She was tall, probably around 5'7", with the kind of pale skin that suggested she spent most of her time indoors. Her black hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she was wearing a faded band t-shirt that hung loosely over dark jeans. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Dark brown, intelligent, and currently sparkling with amusement. "You look like you're about to pass out," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "It's just coffee, not a job interview." "Sorry, I'm just processing," Lucas managed, stepping into her apartment. If his own place was a study in utilitarian college living, Raven's apartment was a carefully curated expression of personality. The walls were painted a deep charcoal gray and covered with framed posters from video games, concerts, and movies. Her gaming setup dominated one corner, a massive curved monitor, high-end mechanical keyboard, and a chair that probably cost more than Lucas's entire furniture budget. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with fantasy novels, technical manuals, and what looked like an impressive collection of vinyl records. "Nice setup," Lucas said, gravitating toward her gaming station. "Is that the new Aurora monitor? I've been drooling over those online." "Guilty," Raven said from the kitchen area. "I may have a slight obsession with having the best gear. Cream and sugar. Just black, thanks." Lucas continued exploring, feeling like he was getting a glimpse into the real person behind Shadow Vixen. A framed photo on one of the shelves caught his attention. Raven with a group of friends at what looked like a gaming convention, all of them grinning and holding trophy-shaped awards. "That was last year's regional championship," Raven said, appearing beside him with 2 steaming mugs. "My team took second place in the strategy tournament." "You never mentioned you competed professionally." "Semi-professionally. It's a hobby that occasionally pays for itself." She settled onto her couch, curling her legs under her. "What about you? Any secret competitive gaming ambitions?" Lucas joined her on the couch, trying to maintain a casual distance while being very aware of how close they were sitting. "Nothing that organized. I just enjoy playing with friends." "Including me?" The question hung in the air between them. Lucas studied Raven's face, trying to read her expression. There was something vulnerable beneath her confident exterior, as if the answer mattered more than she was letting on. "Especially you," he said honestly. "These past few months. I don't know. Gaming with you has been the best part of my days." Raven smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "Mine too, if I'm being honest." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, the weight of months of digital conversation settling into this new, physical reality. Lucas found himself studying the details he'd never been able to see through their gaming. The way Raven tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the small scar on her knuckle, the subtle makeup that emphasized her eyes. "This is weird, isn't it?" Raven said suddenly. "I feel like I know you really well, but also like I'm meeting you for the first time." "Good weird or bad weird?" "Jury's still out." She grinned. "Tell me something I don't know about you. Something that never came up in chat." Lucas considered the question. "I'm terrified of butterflies." "What? Really? Completely irrational phobia. Something about the way they flutter around unpredictably. Makes my skin crawl." Raven laughed, a rich sound that filled the apartment. "That's adorable and ridiculous at the same time." "Okay, my turn. I have a collection of vintage video game cartridges, and I still play my original Nintendo on weekends." "Seriously? That's amazing. Do you have any of the rare ones?" "A few. Want to see?" The next hour passed in a blur of shared interests and discovered compatibilities. Raven's game collection was impressive, Her taste in music was perfectly aligned with his own, and her dry sense of humor translated even better in person than it had through text. They talked about everything: work, family, dreams, embarrassing gaming moments, with the easy familiarity of old friends combined with the electric tension of new attraction. "I should probably let you get back to your evening," Lucas said eventually, noticing that it was nearly midnight. "Actually," Raven said, standing and walking to her gaming setup, "I was thinking we could run that dungeon we've been planning. Seems appropriate for our first in-person gaming session." "You want to sit in the same room and play online together?" "Why not? I can set up a second station." She gestured to a laptop on her dining table. "Unless you'd rather go back to your place and pretend this conversation never happened." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. Shadow Vixen, Raven Blackwood, his mysterious gaming partner and intriguing neighbor, all wrapped up in one person who was currently looking at him with hopeful eyes and a slight smile. "Let's do it," he said. Chapter 6. New Dynamics. Gaming together in the same room created an entirely different dynamic. Lucas found himself distracted by Raven's physical presence. The way she bit her lip when concentrating, the satisfied little sounds she made when a particularly difficult move worked out, the unconscious way she moved her body along with her character during intense combat sequences. "You're getting killed because you're not paying attention," Raven pointed out after Lucas's character died for the third time in 20 minutes. "I'm paying attention," he protested. "Just to different things." Raven glanced over at him, catching the direction of his gaze, and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? And what exactly are you paying attention to?" The question was loaded with possibility. Lucas felt heat rise in his cheeks, but something about Raven's expression encouraged honesty. "You," he admitted. "It's hard to focus on the game when you're right there, and I'm still processing the fact that Shadow Vixen is actually this incredibly beautiful woman who's been living 20 feet away from me for months." Raven paused her game, turning to face him fully. "You think I'm beautiful?" There was something almost shy in the way she asked it, as if the confidence she projected was partly a facade. Lucas set down his controller and turned toward her as well. "Are you kidding? You're gorgeous. And not just physically, though that's definitely part of it. You're smart and funny and talented and—" He trailed off, realizing he was probably saying too much too quickly. And I've been half in love with you since before I knew who you really were." The words hung between them, more honest than Lucas had intended to be. Raven stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Half in love with Shadow Vixen, you mean?" she said quietly. "No," Lucas said firmly. "With you. The person who cares when her teammates are struggling, who sends encouraging messages when someone's having a bad day, who stays up late to help friends through difficult challenges. The person who makes terrible puns in chat and somehow makes them funny. Shadow Vixen was just the name you were using." Raven's smile was soft and uncertain. "Lucas, I know there's an age difference," he said quickly. "And I know this is complicated because we're neighbors and gaming partners and this could mess everything up. But I also know that talking to you has been the best part of my days for months, and meeting you in person has only made that feeling stronger." "The age difference doesn't bother you?" "Does it bother you?" Raven considered the question. "I thought it would. When I realized you were 22, I figured that was the end of any possibilities. But you're not like most 22-year-olds I've known. You're mature and thoughtful and—" She paused. "And you make me feel like I'm interesting again." "Again? I've been in a bit of a rut lately. Work, gaming, sleep, repeat. It's been a comfortable life, but not exactly thrilling. Then this smart, funny guy starts showing up in my games, and suddenly I'm looking forward to my evenings again." Lucas moved closer on the couch, close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo, something dark and floral that suited her perfectly. "So what do we do about it?" he asked. "I have no idea," Raven admitted. I haven't dated anyone in over a year, and I've certainly never dated a neighbor. Or someone I met through gaming. We could start with dinner, Lucas suggested. Actual dinner, not the kind that comes from a delivery app. I could cook for you. You cook? I'm learning. YouTube is a wonderful teacher. Raven laughed. That sounds terrifying and charming at the same time. Is that a yes? She leaned forward, closing some of the distance between them. It's a maybe. I need to think about this, Lucas. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I want to be sure we're both thinking clearly. Lucas nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. Of course. Take all the time you need. Thank you. Raven reached out and touched his hand briefly. And thank you for being honest about how you feel. That took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. In this case, I think it was courage. They finished their gaming session with a new tension humming between them, not uncomfortable, but definitely present. Every accidental touch, every shared laugh, every moment when their eyes met felt charged with possibility. When Lucas finally headed back to his own apartment around 2 a.m., he felt like he was walking on unsteady ground. Chapter 7. Processing. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Lucas and Raven continued their regular gaming sessions, but there was a new layer of awareness in their interactions. Their usual easy banter was still there, but underneath it was the weight of Lucas's confession and Raven's careful consideration. Ray, good morning, neighbor. Sleep well? The message appeared on his screen along with his morning coffee, and Lucas found himself smiling despite his nervousness. About as well as can be expected. You, Ray, I may have stayed up thinking about our conversation. Which was probably counterproductive, but what can you do? Lucas wanted to ask what she'd been thinking about, but he resisted the urge. He'd put his cards on the table. Now he had to let her process without pressuring her. Their gaming that evening was technically flawless. They moved together like they'd been partners for years, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's weaknesses. But emotionally, there was a distance that hadn't been there before. Not hostile, just careful. You're overthinking this, Jake pointed out during a team chat later that week. Both of you are playing like you're afraid to make a mistake. Lucas glanced at his screen, where Raven's character stood perfectly positioned but somehow hesitant. Ray, he's not wrong. We're both playing it safe. Maybe we need to talk, Lucas typed back. Ray, not in group chat. Later. Definitely. That night, instead of their usual post-game conversation, Raven knocked on Lucas's door. She was wearing a long black coat and carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. Peace offering, she said, holding out one of the cups. And maybe a chance to clear the air. Lucas accepted the coffee gratefully and gestured for her to come in. His apartment suddenly felt very small with Raven in it, especially since he was hyper-aware of the unmade bed visible through his bedroom doorway and the pile of laundry he'd been meaning to deal with. Sorry about the mess, he said, hastily moving some books off his couch. I've seen worse. Trust me. Raven settled onto the couch with easy familiarity. So, we should probably talk about the elephant in the room. Which elephant would that be? The one where you told me you were half in love with me and I panicked and asked for time to think about it. Lucas sat down beside her, maintaining careful distance. And have you? Thought about it, I mean. I've thought about little else, Raven admitted. Which is problematic when you're trying to focus on systems architecture. What conclusion did you reach? Raven was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee cup. That I'm scared, she said finally. Of what? Of a lot of things. Of messing up our friendship. Of the fact that you're at a completely different stage of life than I am. of the possibility that this is just proximity and novelty rather than something real. She looked up at him. Of how much I like you. Lucas felt his heart rate accelerate. You like me? I really do. More than I expected to, more than I probably should. These past few months of talking to you, you've made me feel like myself again. Like the interesting parts of myself that I'd started to forget about. What interesting parts? The parts that take chances. The parts that stay up all night talking to someone just because the conversation is too good to end. The parts that believe in possibilities. Raven set down her coffee cup and turned to face him more fully. You make me feel young again, but not in a way that makes me want to be 22. In a way that makes me remember why being alive is exciting. Lucas reached out and took her hand, marveling at how right it felt when their fingers intertwined. So what are you scared of, exactly? He asked gently. What if this doesn't work? What if we try dating and it's a disaster and we lose what we have? I don't want to go back to just being polite neighbors who nod at each other in the hallway. What if it does work? Raven smiled ruefully. That might be even scarier. Lucas lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. What if we try to find out? How? Dinner. Tomorrow night. My place, and I promise to cook something that won't give you food poisoning. We'll call it a date and see how it feels. Raven studied his face for a long moment. And if it feels wrong? Then we figure out how to go back to being friends. But Ray... He squeezed her hand gently. What if it feels right? Then I guess we figure out how to move forward. Lucas felt a grin spread across his face. Is that a yes? It's a yes to dinner. The rest, we'll see. I'll take it. Chapter 8. First Date. Lucas had never been more nervous about cooking in his life. He'd spent the afternoon watching YouTube tutorials, making a trial run of his planned pasta dish, and attempting to make his apartment look like somewhere a sophisticated woman might want to spend an evening. The results were mixed. The food smelled promising, but his decorating skills were limited to hiding the worst of the mess and hoping the lighting would be forgiving. Raven arrived at 7 sharp, carrying a bottle of wine and looking stunning in a way that made Lucas temporarily forget how to form words. She was wearing a black dress that managed to be both elegant and edgy, paired with boots that added to her already impressive height. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was wearing more makeup than usual. Not much, but enough to emphasize her dark eyes. You clean up nice, she said, looking him over approvingly. Lucas had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that Jake had once told him brought out his eyes. You look incredible, he managed. Come in, please. I promise I won't poison you. I brought wine just in case, Raven said, handing him the bottle. It's supposed to pair well with pasta, according to the guy at the liquor store. You asked for pairing advice? I may have mentioned I was having dinner with someone I wanted to impress. The admission sent a warm flutter through Lucas's chest. Well, I'm definitely impressed. Though you could have shown up in your pajamas and I would have been impressed. I'll keep that in mind for next time, Raven said, then paused. I mean, if there is a next time. We haven't even had this time yet. Lucas could hear the nervousness beneath her confident exterior, and it helped calm his own anxiety. They were both uncertain about this, both taking a risk. How about we focus on this time for now, he suggested, leading her to his small dining table. Dinner is almost ready. The meal was actually successful. The pasta was cooked properly, the sauce had the right consistency, and the salad looked like something from a restaurant rather than a college cafeteria. More importantly, conversation flowed as easily as it had in their gaming sessions. They talked about work, travel, embarrassing childhood stories, and favorite books. Lucas found himself relaxing as the evening progressed, remembering why he'd been drawn to Raven in the first place. "This is really good," Raven said, gesturing with her fork. "I'm impressed by your YouTube education." "Wait until you see what I learned about dessert preparation," Lucas said, then immediately worried that sounded like a sexual innuendo. Raven raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Oh, really? Should I be concerned?" "Only if you're afraid of ice cream and store-bought cookies." "Ah, a man of sophisticated culinary tastes. Hey, I never claimed to be a chef. I just promised not to give you food poisoning." After dinner, they settled on his couch with the wine and the promised dessert. The apartment felt smaller with the awareness that this was officially a date, that there were possibilities hanging in the air that hadn't been there during their coffee meetings. "Can I ask you something?" Raven said, curling her legs under her. "Of course. What made you realize you had feelings for me? Was it before or after you figured out who I was?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "Before, I think. There was something about the way you communicated, not just the words, but the personality behind them. You were confident without being arrogant, supportive without being patronizing. You made me want to be a better player, but also a better person." "How so?" "You cared about the team, not just your own performance. You'd stay late to help someone work through a difficult section even when there was nothing in it for you. You made me want to be the kind of person who did things like that." Raven was quiet for a moment. "I did those things because I liked you all. Especially you. Even before you knew what I looked like or how old I was." "Especially then. Age and appearance were just variables. The person you were in those conversations, that was what mattered." Lucas reached out and touched her face gently, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "And now? How do you feel about the complete package?" Raven leaned into his touch. "Terrified," she admitted, "and excited. And like I want to kiss you, but I'm afraid it will change everything." "It probably will change everything," Lucas said honestly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." Raven studied his face for a long moment, then made her decision. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as Lucas responded. Her lips were soft and tasted faintly of wine, and when she slid her hand into his hair, Lucas felt like his entire nervous system lit up. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "How was that?" Raven asked, her forehead resting against his. "Worth the risk," Lucas said immediately. "Good answer." They kissed again, longer this time, with more confidence and less hesitation. Lucas had kissed his share of women, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. The perfect combination of familiar and thrilling, comfortable and electric. "I should probably go," Raven said eventually, though she made no move to actually leave. "Probably," Lucas agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "We said we'd take this slow." "We did say that. Figure things out gradually." "Very sensible." Neither of them moved. Raven's hand was still in his hair, and Lucas could feel the warmth of her body against his side. The sensible thing would be to end the evening now, let them both process what had happened, maybe have another date or two before things progressed. "Lucas," Raven said softly. "Yeah. I don't want to be sensible tonight." Lucas pulled back to look at her, searching her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I'm sure that being sensible has never gotten me anything half as interesting as you." She kissed him again, slower this time, more deliberate. "I'm sure that I want to see where this goes." Lucas stood and offered her his hand. "Then let's find out." Chapter 9. New Territory. Lucas woke up the next morning with sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the warm weight of Raven curled against his side. For a moment he lay still, afraid that moving might break the spell and reveal that the entire evening had been an incredibly vivid dream. But the faint scent of her shampoo on his pillow was real, and the soft sound of her breathing was definitely not something his imagination could have conjured. Raven Blackwood, Shadow Vixen, his mysterious gaming partner, his beautiful neighbor, was actually in his bed, wearing one of his t-shirts and looking younger in sleep than she ever did awake. "You're staring," she murmured without opening her eyes. "How can you tell?" "I can feel it. Also, you're not exactly subtle about it." Raven opened her eyes and smiled at him. "Good morning. Good morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." She stretched languidly, and Lucas tried not to stare at the way his shirt rode up on her thighs. "What time is it?" Lucas glanced at his phone. "Almost 10. We definitely missed our usual morning gaming session. I think Jake might forgive us if we skip one day." Raven propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Honestly? Like I won some kind of lottery I didn't know I'd entered." Lucas reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You? Like I took a bigger risk than I've taken in years, and it actually paid off." She leaned down and kissed him softly. "Also, like I could use some coffee." "I can make coffee. I'm very good at making coffee. I've tasted your coffee, remember? It's adequate at best. Harsh but fair." They made their way to the kitchen together, falling into an easy domestic rhythm that felt both brand new and comfortably familiar. Raven perched on one of his bar stools wearing his shirt and a pair of his boxer shorts, looking perfectly at home in his space. Lucas found himself memorizing the details: the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the small smile that played around her lips, the casual intimacy of sharing breakfast with someone who had been a virtual stranger just days ago. "So what happens now?" Raven asked, accepting a mug of the allegedly adequate coffee. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to see where this goes," she said. "But I also want to be realistic about the challenges." Lucas sat down across from her. "What kind of challenges?" "Well, we're neighbors, which could be either convenient or problematic depending on how things work out. We're gaming partners, which means our friend group is going to notice any changes in our dynamic. And there's still the age difference." "Does the age difference really bother you?" Raven considered the question. "Not the number itself. But we're at different life stages. You're just starting your career, figuring out who you want to be. I'm established, settled, maybe a little set in my ways." "What if I like your ways?" "What if you grow out of liking them? What if you meet someone your own age who shares your sense of adventure?" Lucas reached across the small table and took her hand. "Ray, I can't promise you that I'll never change or that we'll never face challenges. But I can promise you that right now, in this moment, there's nowhere else I'd rather be and no one else I'd rather be with." Raven squeezed his fingers. "That's probably the best anyone can promise." "So we take it one day at a time?" "One day at a time," she agreed. Chapter 10. Integration. Telling Jake turned out to be easier than either of them had expected. During their next group gaming session, Jake noticed immediately that something had changed. "Okay, what's going on with you two?" he asked over voice chat. "You're playing like you're sharing a brain." Lucas and Raven, who were indeed sharing Lucas's apartment and had spent the last hour figuring out their team strategy over breakfast, exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Raven asked innocently. "I mean you just executed a 15-move combo without a single text message between you. Either you've developed telepathy, or something's changed. Maybe we've just been playing together long enough to anticipate each other's moves," Lucas suggested. "Or maybe," came Jake's knowing voice, Shadow Vixen finally met her match. There was a pause in the game as everyone processed this statement. "Jake," Raven said carefully, "what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you two have been flirting through dungeon raids for months, and anyone with eyes could see it. The only question was whether you'd ever figure it out. Lucas looked at Raven, who was trying not to smile. You knew? Dude, it was obvious. The way you'd always make sure Shadow was okay during difficult fights, the way you'd stay online late just to chat with her, the way your whole attitude changed when she was in the party. Jake's character performed a little victory dance. Plus, Shadow, you weren't exactly subtle either. I was completely subtle, Raven protested. You once spent 20 minutes explaining a boss fight strategy to Lucas in detail, then just told the rest of us to wing it. That was strategically sound advice. Sure it was. So are you two dating or what? Lucas and Raven looked at each other again. They hadn't explicitly defined what they were doing yet, but Jake's directness forced the issue. We're figuring it out, Lucas said finally. Which is a yes, Raven added with a smile in her voice. Finally, Jake exclaimed. This is the best news I've heard all month. You two are perfect for each other. The rest of their gaming group took the news with similar enthusiasm. Apparently, their attraction had been obvious to everyone except themselves. It was both embarrassing and oddly validating to learn that their friends had been essentially waiting for them to catch up to what everyone else could see. So this changes nothing gameplay-wise, right? Asked Sarah, one of their regular teammates. Because you two are already an unstoppable team. If anything, it should improve our coordination, Raven pointed out. Great, now they're going to be even more impossible to keep up with, Jake grumbled good-naturedly. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Lucas and Raven maintained their separate apartments, but they found themselves spending most evenings together. Sometimes they'd game with their usual group, sometimes they'd play solo campaigns together, and sometimes they'd just talk or watch movies or cook dinner. The domesticity of it was surprisingly comfortable. They fit together in ways that Lucas hadn't expected, their different personalities complementing rather than clashing. Lucas learned that Raven was methodical about everything, from her gaming strategies to her morning routine. She planned meals a week in advance, kept detailed notes on game mechanics, and had strong opinions about the proper organization of kitchen utensils. But she was also spontaneous in unexpected ways, willing to stay up until 3 a.m. exploring a new game, ready to try a new restaurant on a whim, open to changing plans if something more interesting came up. Raven discovered that Lucas was more thoughtful than his casual exterior suggested. He remembered small details about her preferences, noticed when she was stressed about work, and had a talent for making her laugh when she was taking herself too seriously. He was also more ambitious than she'd initially realized. Not just content to drift through entry-level positions, but genuinely excited about building a career in technology. I got a call back for that software development position, Lucas announced one evening as they settled in for their usual gaming session. The one at Dataflow? Raven looked up from configuring her character's equipment. That's fantastic. How did the interview go? Better than I expected. They seemed impressed by the projects I showed them, and the salary range they mentioned was. He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Well, it would mean I could actually afford decent furniture. Your furniture has character, Raven said diplomatically. My furniture is held together by hope and duct tape. Like I said, character. Lucas laughed, but there was something thoughtful in his expression. It would also mean I could afford to take you on actual dates. Nice restaurants, weekend trips, that kind of thing. Lucas, you know I don't need expensive dates, right? Some of my favorite evenings have been sitting on your questionable couch eating takeout. I know. But I want to be able to offer you more than that. Raven set down her controller and turned to face him fully. Is this about the age difference again? Maybe partly. I know you're established and successful, and I'm still figuring out my career. I don't want you to feel like you're dating down. Dating down? Raven moved closer to him on the couch. Lucas, I'm not with you because of your earning potential or your furniture quality. I'm with you because you make me laugh and think and feel like the most interesting version of myself. Still, it would be nice to not be the broke college graduate forever. It would be nice for you to feel confident about your own accomplishments, Raven agreed. But don't do it for me. Do it because you want to build something for yourself. Lucas kissed her softly. What did I do to deserve you? You were yourself. That was more than enough. The job offer came through 2 weeks later, along with a salary that made Lucas briefly question whether he'd read the email correctly. His start date was the beginning of the next month, which gave him time to process the change and prepare for what felt like a major step into adult life. We should celebrate, Raven announced when he told her the news. Dinner somewhere that requires reservations. Or, Lucas suggested, we could have our own celebration. I'll cook something more ambitious than pasta. You can pick out wine that costs more than $5, and we can enjoy not having to make small talk with strangers. I like this plan better. That evening, as Lucas attempted a recipe that involved multiple courses and Raven provided commentary from the kitchen counter, it occurred to him how completely his life had changed in the span of a few months. 6 months ago, he'd been a recent graduate with no clear direction, spending his evenings gaming with online friends and wondering what came next. Now he had a girlfriend he was falling more in love with every day, a career opportunity that excited him, and a sense of possibility that extended far beyond his computer screen. "Penny for your thoughts," Raven said, noticing his contemplative mood. "Just thinking about how different everything is now." "Good different or overwhelming different?" "Definitely good different." Lucas turned from the stove and pulled her into his arms. "The best kind of different. Even though your mysterious online gaming partner turned out to be your slightly eccentric older neighbor?" "Especially because of that." They kissed in the kitchen while something that smelled suspiciously like burning garlic filled the air, and Lucas realized that he'd never been happier to have his carefully laid plans disrupted by the unexpected. 3 months into his new job, Lucas was beginning to understand what Raven meant about feeling established. The work was challenging and engaging, his colleagues respected his contributions, and his paycheck allowed him to upgrade from surviving to actually living. He'd bought real furniture, restocked his kitchen with ingredients that didn't come from boxes, and was even considering trading in his aging laptop for something that could handle the latest games without sounding like a jet engine. But the biggest change was in his relationship with Raven. The initial excitement of discovery had settled into something deeper and more sustainable. They developed routines and inside jokes, weathered their first real argument about the proper way to organize shared gaming time, and reached the point where Lucas couldn't imagine his life without her in it, which made his current dilemma particularly complicated. "The conference is in Seattle," he explained to Raven over dinner. 3 days, all expenses paid, presenting my work on the user interface project." "That's amazing, Lucas. You should absolutely go. It's the same weekend as the Regional Gaming Championship, the one you've been training for." Raven paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Oh. They'd been planning to attend the tournament together for weeks. Raven's team had a real chance of winning their division, and Lucas had been looking forward to finally seeing her compete in person. It would also be their first trip together, and he'd been secretly excited about the prospect of a weekend away. "Can you reschedule the presentation?" Raven asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "It's a keynote slot. They picked me specifically because of the interface work, and there are people from major tech companies who'll be there. My boss says it could open doors." "Then you have to go. But your tournament will happen again next year. This kind of career opportunity might not." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. "I feel terrible about this." "Don't. This is exactly the kind of thing you should be prioritizing right now. Come with me." Raven looked surprised. "To Seattle?" "Why not? You could compete in next year's championship, But how often do we get a chance to explore a new city together? Lucas, my team is counting on me. We've been preparing for months. And my career is important to me. But so are you. They stared at each other across the table, both recognizing that this was their first real test of how their different priorities would play out in practice. Let me think about it, Raven said finally. The next few days were tense in a way that their relationship hadn't experienced before. They maintained their usual routines, but there was an underlying current of uncertainty that neither of them quite knew how to address. Lucas found himself second-guessing his request. Was he being selfish by asking Raven to change her plans? But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that if they were going to build something lasting, they needed to be willing to prioritize each other when it mattered. The answer came in an unexpected form. I talked to my team, Raven announced one evening. They're going to compete with a substitute player. Ray, you don't have to. I want to. Not because you asked me to, but because I realized something. She settled next to him on the couch, his new, actually comfortable couch that didn't require strategic positioning to avoid springs. I've been competing in gaming tournaments for years. I'll compete in more. But I've never been in a relationship where someone wanted me to be part of their important moments. Of course I want you there. My ex-boyfriend never even told me when he had work events. Said it would be boring for me, that I wouldn't fit in with his colleagues. Raven leaned against Lucas's shoulder. You're asking me to be part of something you're proud of. That means more to me than winning a tournament. Lucas wrapped his arms around her, feeling a rush of love so intense it was almost overwhelming. I love you, he said, the words slipping out before he could consider them. Raven went very still. They hadn't said that yet, despite several moments when the words had hung unspoken in the air between them. You love me? She asked quietly. Yeah, I really do. Raven pulled back to look at his face, as if checking for sincerity. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she smiled, a radiant, unguarded expression that made Lucas's heart skip. I love you too, she said. Which is why I want to be in Seattle cheering for you when you give the presentation that's going to launch your career. It's one presentation, not a career launch. We'll see about that. As it turned out, Raven was right. The presentation went better than Lucas had dared to hope, and the connections he made at the conference led to opportunities he couldn't have imagined just a year earlier. But more importantly, having Raven there to share the experience with him made it feel real in a way it wouldn't have alone. Standing in their hotel room overlooking Elliott Bay, watching Raven research restaurants for dinner while simultaneously optimizing her character build for their evening gaming session, Lucas realized that this was what partnership looked like. Not just the romantic moments, but the daily choice to build something together, to prioritize each other's dreams alongside your own. Find anything good? He asked, coming up behind her and resting his hands on her shoulders. 3 possibilities, ranging from might require a second mortgage to definitely requires a second mortgage. Raven leaned back against him. Though I'm also seeing some intriguing food truck options. Food trucks could be fun. More adventurous. Since when are you adventurous about food? Since I fell in love with someone who thinks breakfast pizza is a legitimate meal choice. Breakfast pizza is amazing and you know it. Lucas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I know. I love that about you. Just that. That's just the beginning of a very long list. They spent their last evening in Seattle walking along the waterfront, sharing overpriced fish and chips and talking about everything and nothing. The conversation ranged from Lucas's presentation feedback to Raven's ideas for new gaming strategies to their tentative plans for the future. I've been thinking, Raven said as they sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. My lease is up in 3 months. Are you planning to move? Maybe. Depends on whether someone I know might be interested in a roommate. Lucas turned to look at her, heart hammering. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd want to move in together. Your place or mine, or maybe somewhere new entirely." The suggestion was logical. They spent most of their time together anyway, and combining their resources would give them more options for where to live. But it also represented a significant step forward in their relationship, a public commitment to building something long-term. "Yes," Lucas said without hesitation. "Definitely yes. Just like that. Raven, I've been half living in your apartment for months anyway. Making it official sounds perfect. Even though it means you'll have to deal with my obsessive organization habits on a daily basis? Even though it means you'll have to deal with my tendency to leave dishes in the sink overnight. I can work with that. Then yes, let's do it." They kissed as the sun set over Puget Sound, both of them grinning too much for it to be entirely successful. But it didn't matter. They had time to perfect their technique. The apartment they found was a compromise in the best possible way. Bigger than either of their previous places, with enough space for 2 gaming setups and a kitchen that could accommodate Lucas's growing interest in cooking. It was in a neighborhood that split the difference between Raven's preference for quiet residential streets and Lucas's desire to be close to restaurants and nightlife. Moving in together revealed new layers of compatibility and adjustment. Raven's methodical approach to unpacking and organizing clashed initially with Lucas's tendency to tackle projects in random order, but they found a rhythm that worked for both of them. Lucas learned to appreciate the calm efficiency of Raven's systems, while Raven discovered that Lucas's more flexible approach could lead to creative solutions she wouldn't have considered. Their gaming setup became the envy of their online friends. 2 high-end workstations positioned so they could easily communicate during team play, with a shared screen for strategy planning and a sound system that made their apartment the preferred location for group voice chats. Jake joked that they'd created a professional gaming cave, but Lucas could tell he was impressed. "You know what this means, right?" Raven said one evening as they tested their new equipment setup. "That we're going to dominate every game we play? That we can finally start that streaming channel we talked about." They'd discussed the idea several times, combining Raven's competitive gaming skills with Lucas's technical knowledge and natural commentary style to create content for other gamers. But between work, their relationship, and their existing gaming commitments, it had remained just an idea. "You really want to do that? I think we'd be good at it. We work well together, we're both skilled players, and we have different perspectives that could be interesting for viewers." Lucas considered the proposition. His job was going well, but the idea of building something creative with Raven appealed to him. And with their combined technical skills and gaming expertise, they could probably create content that stood out from the thousands of other gaming channels. What would we focus on? Strategy guides? Entertainment? Competition coverage? Why not all of it? We could do weekly strategy sessions, cover major tournaments, maybe some collaborative gameplay with couples from other gaming communities. Couples gaming content? Think about it. There's a huge audience for relationship content, and gaming couples are pretty underrepresented. We could show people that you don't have to choose between having a serious relationship and being a serious gamer. The more they talked about it, the more excited Lucas became. It would be a way to combine their shared passion with their individual strengths and potentially build something that could become significant over time. "Let's do it," he said finally. "But we start small. Weekly uploads, see how people respond, build an audience gradually." Deal. Their first video was a disaster in all the ways that first attempts usually are. The audio was uneven. Lucas forgot he was being recorded several times and made faces at the screen, and Raven was so focused on playing perfectly that she barely spoke. But they learned from it, and the second video was better. By the 5th video, they'd found their rhythm. The channel grew slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as word spread through gaming communities. Viewers responded to their genuine chemistry and complementary skills. Lucas's natural teaching ability combined well with Raven's strategic expertise, and their obvious affection for each other added a warmth that set them apart from more competitive channels. "We hit 10,000 subscribers," Raven announced one morning, checking their analytics over coffee. "Seriously? Seriously?" And the tournament coverage video from last week is trending in the gaming category. Lucas looked at the numbers on her screen, hardly believing what he was seeing. What had started as a fun project had become something with real potential. "Should we start taking this more seriously?" he asked. "How much more seriously?" "I don't know. Merchandise? Sponsorship deals? Regular streaming schedules?" Raven was quiet for a moment, considering. "What if we treated it like a real business? Set goals, create a content calendar, maybe even consider whether this could become our primary income source eventually." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Lucas loved his job, but the possibility of working with Raven full-time, building something entirely their own, was incredibly appealing. "It would be a risk," he pointed out. "Everything worthwhile is a risk. We'd be working together all the time. Some couples can't handle that much togetherness." "Have we had any problems so far?" Lucas thought about their partnership over the past year. Gaming together, living together, now creating content together. There had been disagreements and adjustments, but their fundamental compatibility had never been in question. "No," he admitted. "We haven't." "Then maybe we're not like other couples." "Maybe we're not." The conversation continued over dinner, then during their evening gaming session, then late into the night as they lay in bed discussing possibilities and logistics. By morning, they decided to give themselves 6 months to see if they could grow the channel to the point where it could support them both financially. It was ambitious and risky and completely unlike anything Lucas had imagined himself doing 2 years earlier. But lying next to Raven in the apartment they'd chosen together, talking about a future they could build as partners in every sense of the word, it felt like the most natural decision in the world. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," came her sleepy reply. "Even if you are crazy enough to think we can make a living playing video games." Says the woman who suggested it. "Fair point." Lucas smiled, pulling Raven closer against his side. Outside their window, the city continued its endless motion, full of people pursuing their own dreams and taking their own risks. But inside their bedroom, in the quiet space they'd created together, everything felt perfectly aligned. He'd started this journey as a recent graduate with no clear direction, spending his evenings gaming with strangers online. Now he was building a life and a future with someone who had started as the most intriguing of those strangers and had become the person he couldn't imagine living without. "Hey, Ray," he whispered. "Thank you for accepting that party invite all those months ago. Thank you for sending it." And with that, they fell asleep planning their next video, their next adventure, their next step forward together. In the morning, they'd wake up and dive into the work of building their shared dream, one game at a time.